Hello. Hello, hello, hello. My mic on? Yes, it is. Hello. Watch me struggle to get into this chair real quick. Just sliding on in. All right, we did it. Now I'm not gonna move for at least the next 30 to 45 minutes while I read this next chapter. Hi, how are we? Hello, happy Wednesday night. All right, usually on Wednesday nights, I am not streaming, or actually occasionally I'm streaming, But my Wednesday night streams are usually children's books, picture books, you know. But today, it is not. Today, we are continuing our Pride and Prejudice journey because tomorrow, I'm hanging out with a pal, and I wanted to make sure that I still was able to stream some night this week. And this was the only night that I was free. So alas, we have a Wednesday night Pride and Prejudice stream. Yes. How is everyone? Oh my god, yes. Okay. So we are starting volume 3 of Pride and Prejudice, which is the final volume, dudes. We're on page of this edition. We're on page 328. And the end is... We have less than 100 pages to go. We have about 80 pages of this to go. So about 6 more streams. Not even. No, we have like 70 more pages to go. So yeah, still about 6 more streams, so which is great. 5 or 6 more streams. So yeah. Okay, but anyway, without further ado, I'm just going to jump right into it. This first chapter is kind of on the longer side. So let's read the last paragraph of the chapter prior so that we can get into it. Okay. Accordingly, when she retired at night, she asked the chambermaid whether Pemberley were not a very fine place, what the name of its proprietor, and with no little alarm, whether the family were down for the summer. A most welcome negative followed the last question, and her alarms being now removed, she was at leisure to feel a great deal of curiosity, to see the house herself. And when the subject was revived the next morning, and she was again applied to, could readily answer, and with a proper air of indifference, that she had not really any dislike to the scheme. To Pemberley, therefore, they were to go. Okay. All right, so they're going to Pemberley. I think her and the girls and someone else, but I forget. So let's read and find out. Chapter 3, volume 1. Okay. Elizabeth, as they drove along, watched for the first appearance of Pemberley Woods with some perturbation. And when at length they turned in at the lodge, her spirits were in high flutter. The park was very large and contained a great variety of ground. They entered it in one of its lowest points and drove for some time through a beautiful wood stretching over a wide extent. Elizabeth's mind was too full of conversation, but she saw and admired every remarkable spot and point of view. They gradually ascended for half a mile, and then found themselves at the top of a considerable eminence, where the wood ceased, and the eye was instantly caught by Pemberley House, situated on the opposite side of the valley, into which the road, with some abruptness, wound. It was a large, handsome, stone building, standing well on rising ground, and backed with a ridge of high woody hills. And in front, a stream of some natural importance was swelling into greater, but without any artificial appearance. Its banks were neither formal nor falsely adorned. Elizabeth was delighted. She had never seen a place for which nature had done more, or where natural beauty had been so little counteracted by an awkward taste. They were all of them warm in their admiration, and at that moment she felt that to be mistress of Pemberley might be something. They descended the hill, crossed the bridge, and drove to the door, and, while examining the nearer aspect of the house, all her apprehensions of meeting its owner returned. She dreaded lest the chambermaid had been mistaken. On applying to see the place, they were admitted into the hall, and Elizabeth, as they waited, for the housekeeper, had leisure to wonder at her being where she was. The housekeeper came, a respectable-looking elderly woman, much less fine and more civil, and than she had any notion of finding her. They followed her into the dining parlor. It was a large, well-proportioned room, handsomely fitted up. Elizabeth, after slightly surveying it, went to a window to enjoy its prospect. The hill, crowned with wood, from which they had descended, receiving increased abruptness from the distance, was a beautiful object. Every disposition of the ground was good, and she looked on the whole scene, the river, the trees scattered on its banks, and the winding of the valley as far as she could trace it, with delight. As they passed into other rooms, these objects were taking different positions, and from every window they were beauties to be seen. The rooms were lofty and handsome, and their furniture suitable to the fortune of their proprietor, but Elizabeth saw with admiration of his taste that it was neither gaudy nor uselessly fine, and less of splendor with more elegance than the furniture of Rosings. And of this place, thought she, I might have been mistress. With these rooms I might now have been familiarly acquainted. Instead of viewing them as a stranger, I might have rejoiced in them as my own, and welcomed to them as visitors my uncle and aunt. But no, recollecting herself, that could never be. My uncle and aunt would have been lost to me. I should not have been allowed to invite them. This was her lucky recollection. It saved her from something like regret. She longed to inquire of the housekeeper whether her master were really absent, but had no courage for it. At length, however, the question was asked by her uncle, and she turned away with alarm, while Mrs. Reynolds replied that he was, adding, "But we expect him tomorrow with a large party of friends." How rejoiced was Elizabeth that their own journey had not by any circumstance been delayed a day. Her aunt now called her to look at a picture. She approached and saw the likeness of Mr. Wickham suspended amongst several other miniatures over the mantelpiece. Her aunt asked her smilingly how she liked it. The housekeeper came forward and told them it was a picture of the young gentleman, the son of her late master's steward, who had been brought up by him at his own expense. He is now gone into the army, she added, but I am afraid he has turned out very wild. Mrs. Gardiner looked at her niece with a smile, but Elizabeth could not return it. "And that," said Mrs. Reynolds, pointing to another of the miniatures, "is my master, and very much, and very like him. It was drawn at the same time as the others, about 8 years ago." "I have heard much of your master's fine person," said Mrs. Gardiner, looking at the picture. "It is a handsome face. But, Lizzie, you can tell us whether it is like or not." Mrs. Reynolds' respect for Elizabeth seemed to increase on her limitation of her knowing her master. "Does that young lady know Mr. Darcy?" Elizabeth colored and said, "A little." "And Do you not think him a very handsome gentleman, ma'am? Yes, very handsome. I am sure I know none so handsome, but in the gallery upstairs you will see a finer, larger picture of him than this. This room was my late master's favorite room, and these miniatures are just as they used to be. He was very fond of them. This accounted to Elizabeth for Mr. Wickham's being amongst them. Mrs. Reynolds then directed their attention to one of Miss Darcy, drawn when she was only 8 years old. And is Miss Darcy as handsome as her brother? Said Miss Gardner. Oh, yes, the handsomest young lady that has ever been seen, and so accomplished. She plays and sings all day long. In the next room is a new instrument just come down to her, a present from my master. She comes here tomorrow with him. Mrs. Gardner, whose manners were easy and pleasant, encouraged her communicativeness by his questions and remarks. Mrs. Reynolds, either from pride or attachment, had evidently great pleasure in talking of her master and his sister. Is your master much at Pemberley in the course of a year? Not so much as I could wish, sir, but I dare say he may spend half his time here, and Miss Darcy is always down for the summer months. Except, thought Elizabeth, when she goes to Ramsgate. If your master would marry, she would see more of him. Yes, sir. Hola, monito Iván. ¿Cómo estás? How you doing? Welcome. Thanks for being here. How is your day today? Okay. Yes, sir, but I do not know when that will be. I do not know who is good enough for him. Mr. and Mrs. Gardner smiled. Elizabeth could not help saying, "It is very much to his credit, I am sure, that you should think so." Oh, dude, don't even apologize. I love getting distracted. It's all good. Yes, thank you. I try to have some voice inflection so that you can tell the different characters that are going on, because I feel like it's easy to get lost otherwise. But yeah, thank you. I try to put some inflection in there. But yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. Never apologize for interrupting. I love getting distracted and chatting. Kind of shy to do that when I've read out loud for others. Fair. It's definitely something that you have to practice and get used to. Yeah, and reading for a long time can just be tiring in general. That's why I've kind of learned that I try to only read, like with this book, the pages are so long that I can only read 15 pages per reading stream. Other books, it's easier, but, or longer, or whatever. But like, I feel like once I hit the like hour and 45-minute mark, I just find my voice getting like so sick of reading. So it's definitely something that you have to practice if you want to like have the more, you know, proper inflections. But honestly, a lot of people, I know you said that all of your characters sound monotone, and that's fair. Like, you know, it's nice to have them sound different, but also some people just want a voice to listen to, even if it's monotone. I always I feel like I do these streams hoping that, you know, if you're just listening, maybe you're reading this, you're listening to fall asleep, or you just want a voice in the background. So, you know, yeah. You prefer to read in your mind, totally fair. I mean, me too, honestly. What do you like reading? What are my favorite genres? Ooh, I like thrillers. Thrillers are my favorite genre to read. Something like mysterious and maybe like an unreliable narrator is my favorite type of thing. Have been leaning more into fantasy recently, but never romance. Like, this is a very different type of book for me to be reading. This is in my personal reading life. When I'm reading on stream, I read classics and poetry, and like picture books. Sci-fi, fantasy, mostly sci-fi. Cool. I like sci-fi too. Yeah, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is like one of my favorite books of all time. Okay. I say no more than the truth, and what everybody will say that knows him, replied the other. Elizabeth thought that this was getting far, and she listened with increasing astonishment as the housekeeper added, I have never had a cross word from him in my life, and I have known him ever since he was 4 years old. This was praise, of all the others most extraordinary, most opposite of her ideas. That he was a good-tempered man had been her firmest opinion. Her keenest attention was awakened. She longed to hear more and was grateful to her uncle for saying, There are very few people of whom so much can be said. You are lucky in having such a master. Yes, sir, I know I am. If I was to go through the world, I would not meet a better. But I have always observed that they are good-natured with children, are good-natured when they grow up, and he has always the sweetest-tempered, most gracious-hearted boy in the world. Elizabeth stared at her. Can this be Mr. Darcy? Thought she. His father was an excellent man, said Mrs. Gardner. Yes, ma'am, that he was indeed, and his son will be just like him, just as affable to the poor. Yes, I do like writing. I write a lot. Yeah, that's kind of my thing. I actually do a lot of writing and co-working streams on Twitch. So if you ever are looking for someone to do a co-working streamer, or you're looking for, you know, writing streamers in general, I do writing streams here on Twitch as well. But yes, I write. I write so many different things. I kind of feel like I tell people that I write everything but poetry. I write plays, music, musicals, and fiction, creative nonfiction. Like, I love flash fiction as well. But just never poetry. I love reading poetry. I just don't like writing it. Poetry, diary, novels. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I also journal and write in a diary, but I don't consider that like part of my writing career. But yes, I do. I do journal as well. Yeah, this is why I say I'm like, even though I'm, you know, maybe no one knows my name as a writer. Yeah, I was about to say, I feel like I don't have anything published besides like my college literary magazine. And yeah, I've never had like, but I've had some plays produced. Some of the plays I've written have been put on, which that's not technically published, but so yeah, no, not really published yet, but still writing And I always say, even if I never get recognition for my writing, I'm still gonna write so much. So I'm still a writer, even if it's not, necessarily getting recognized. What about posted online? Well, so if you check out my page, you will see my blog, and that's where I post a lot of creative nonfiction and some haiku writing that I do. So I guess I write poetry like sometimes, but just haikus. But I am in a band called Tryptophan, and the links to that are also in my Twitch bio. And I mean, songwriting is a big portion of my writing life, so you can check out my music, and that's kind of a way of seeing the stuff that I write. And yeah, you can also see my website and see where I'm posting stuff. But about a race name, what do you mean by a race name? I'm glad that you're writing. That's so cool. What genre and what medium? What kind of writing are you doing? I don't know what you mean by a race name. Can you explain that? Okay, I'm gonna read this next like half a page, and then I will answer any further questions or have any further conversation that I have. Okay. Elizabeth listened, wondered, doubted, and was impatient for more. Mrs. Reynolds could interest her on no other point. She related the subject of the pictures, the dimensions of the rooms, and the price of the furniture in vain. Mr. Gardner, highly amused by the kind of family prejudice to which he attributed his excessive commendation of her master, soon led again to the subject, and was dwelt with energy of his many merits. And they proceeded together up a great staircase. He is the best landlord and the best master, said she, that ever lived. Not like the wild young men nowadays who think of nothing but themselves. There is not one of his tenants or servants but will give him a good name. Some people call him proud, but I have been sure I never saw anything of it. To my fancy, it is only because he does not rattle away like other young men. In what an amiable light does this place him, thought Elizabeth. This fine account of him, whispered her aunt as they walked, is not quite consistent with his behavior to our poor friend. Perhaps we might be deceived. It's not very likely. Our authority was too good. On reaching the spacious lobby above, they were shown into a very pretty sitting room, lately fitted up with the greater elegance and lightness of the apartments below, and were informed that it was but just done to give pleasure to Miss Darcy, who had taken a liking to the room when last at Pemberley. He is certainly a good brother, said Elizabeth as she walked toward one of the windows. Mrs. Reynolds anticipated Miss Darcy's delight, and when she could enter the room, and this is always the way with him, she added. Whatever can give my sister any pleasure is sure to be done in a moment. There's nothing— Ah! Lily! Lily! Lily, no! Oh my god! Lily! Oh my god. My dog knocked over my camera. Alright, hold on. I don't know if you can hear me, but hold on. Hello? Hello? Alright. Jesus Christ. Okay, so that was my dog Lily. Decided to come in and knock over the camera. So that was great. Yeah, everything's fine. That was funny. Yeah, Lily was sitting on my bed for the longest time, and I saw her get up and go to the door, and I know she had to get out of my room. I know she wanted to get out, but I was like, let me get to this end of this page, and then I'll stand up and open the door. But apparently I wasn't fast enough, and she like, I have all the wires like running across the floor right now, so I knew she would knock something over if she came and talked to me, but I was like, Lily, just wait for 3 seconds. But no, she could not wait. She had to get out immediately. Um, okay, I think we're generally back to the way things were. All right, thank you for bearing with that brief intermission. Okay, so okay, my race is kind of like, okay, my race is kind of like a mix between an angel and an elf in appearance, young, beautiful, and live longer. But I want my own flavor and don't want to name my race as something pre-existent. I can hear, oh, okay. Okay, hell yeah, I'm glad everything works fine, thanks. Um, hmm. Hmm. I don't know. Because it's between an angel and an elf in appearance. I feel like those are two very magical realms. And like, I guess like if you think about the Lord of the Rings, like you think of the name like hobbits, and that comes from like their environment. So I don't know if you want to give them a name of the race that has something to do with like where they live. Um, or I guess you could name their race based off of like how they look. Um, yeah, you don't want something pre-existent. I mean, that's so cool that you've already had the thought that you want to give their kind like a name. Um, it has to sound kind of Latin. Ooh. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. That's a hard question. Honestly, I think you should start with some of your favorite Latin sounding words that are already in existence and like think about why you like those words and then pull from them to get the name of this race. No, thank you for bringing me into your like writing process, and I hope that you come up with something because that sounds like a cool challenge to come up with that, and it'll determine a lot of how the rest of the book goes. So yeah, let me know if you come up with something. Okay, Mrs. Reynolds anticipated Miss Darcy's delight, and when she could enter the room. And this is always the way with him, she added. Also, hi Doom. I saw you here. Thanks for jumping in. There's nothing he would not do for her. The picture gallery and 2 or 3 of the principal bedrooms were all that remained to be shown. In the former, there were many good paintings, but Elizabeth knew nothing of the art, and from such it had been already visible below. She had willingly turned to look at some drawings of Miss Darcy's in crayons, whose subjects were usually more interesting but also more intelligible. In the gallery, there were many family portraits, and they could have little to fix the attention of a stranger. Elizabeth walked on in quest of the only face whose features would be known to her. At last it arrested her, and she beheld a striking resemblance of Mr. Darcy, but with such a smile over the face, and she remembered to have sometimes seen when he looked at her. He stood several minutes before the picture in earnest contemplation, and remembered to do it again before they quitted the gallery. Mrs. Reynolds informed them that it had taken his father's lifetime. What do I think about the name? Cadine o Marosa? You can ignore the accent if you want. It's a character from the race, and his name is gibberish, and I wanted something that sounded kind of Spanish but with a foreign mix. Ooh, I mean, that definitely has a lot of Spanish flair to it with the accent. Bravosa. Cadime o bravosa. Yeah, like that first syllable of the last name is definitely a little tricky, but I like it. I like it a lot. It sounds fun. It sounds kind of like mysterious of a name, and I like that. So, yeah, it's good stuff. I enjoy it a lot. Okay, bra. Very cool. It's an antagonist. Okay, see, I got that vibe. That's cool. There was certainly at this moment in Elizabeth's mind a more gentle sensation toward the original than she had ever felt in the height of their acquaintance. The commendation bestowed on him by Mr. Reynolds was of no trifling nature. What praise is more valuable than the praise of an intelligent servant? As a brother, a landlord, a master, she considered how many people's happiness were in his guardianship, how much of pleasure or pain it was in his power to bestow, how much of good and evil must be done by him. Every idea that had been brought forward by the housekeeper was favorable to his character, and as she stood before the canvas of which he was represented and fixed his eyes upon herself, she thought of his regard with a deep sentiment of gratitude that it had ever raised before her. She remembered its warmth and softened its impropriety of expression. When all the house that was open to general inspection had been seen, they turned downstairs, and taking leave of the housekeeper, were consigned over the gardener, who met them at the hall door. As they walked across the lawn toward the river, Elizabeth turned back to look again. Her uncle and aunt stopped also, and while the former was conjecturing as to the date of the building, the owner of it himself suddenly came forward from the road, which led behind it to the stables. They were within 20 yards of each other, and so abrupt was his appearance that it was impossible to avoid the sight. Their eyes instantly met, and the cheeks of each were overspread with the deepest blush. He absolutely started, and for a moment seemed immovable from surprise, but shortly recovered himself, advanced toward the party, and spoke to Elizabeth, if not in terms of perfect composure, at least of perfect civility. She had instinctively turned away, but stopping on his approach, received his compliments with an embarrassment impossible to be overcome. Hold on, I just have to think about something for a minute. Okay. Had his first appearance, or his resemblance to the picture they had just been examining, been insufficient to assure the other two that they now saw Mr. Darcy, the gardener's expression of surprise or beholding his master must immediately have told it. They stood a little aloof while he was talking to their niece, who, astonished and confused, scarcely dared lift her eyes to his face, and knew not what answer she returned to his civil enquiries about her family. Amazed as the alteration of his manner since they last parted, every sentence that was uttered was increasing her embarrassment, and every idea of the impropriety of her being found there recurring to her mind. The few minutes in which they continued together were some of the most uncomfortable in her life. Nor did she seem much more at ease when he spoke. His accent had none of its usual sedatedness, and he repeated his enquiries as to the time of her having left Longbourn and to stay in Derbyshire so often and in so hurried a way as plainly spoke the distraction of his thoughts. At length, every idea seemed to fail him, and after standing a few moments without saying a word, suddenly recollected himself and took leave. The others then joined her and expressed their admiration of his figure, but Elizabeth heard not a word, and, wholly engrossed by her own feelings, followed them in silence. She was overpowered by shame and vexation. Her coming there was the most unfortunate, most ill-judged thing in the world. How strange must it appear to him! In what disgraceful light must he not strike so vain a man? It might seem that she had purposely thrown herself in his way again. Oh, why did she come? Or why did she thus come a day before he was expected? Had they only been 10 minutes sooner, they would have been beyond the reach of his discrimination, for it was plain that he was that moment arrived, the moment aligned from his horse or his carriage. She blushed again and again over the perverseness of the meeting, and his behavior, so strikingly altered. What could it mean? That he should even speak to her was amazing, but to speak with such civility, to inquire after her family, never in her life had she seen his manners so little dignified, never had he spoken with such gentleness as on this unexpected meeting. What a contrast did it offer to the last address in Rosings Park, when he had put his letter into her hand. She knew not what to think, nor how to account for it. They had now entered a beautiful walk by the side of the water, and every step was bringing forward a nobler fall of ground, or a finer reach of the woods to which they were approaching. But it was some time before Elizabeth saw sensible of any of it, and though she answered mechanically to the appeals of her uncle and aunt, and seemed to direct her eyes to such objects as they pointed out, she distinguished no part of the scene. Her thoughts were all fixed on that one spot of Pemberley House, whichever it might be, where Mr. Darcy then was. She longed to know what at that moment was passing in his mind, in what manner he thought of her, and whether, in defiance of everything, she was still dear to him. Perhaps he had been civil, only because he felt himself at ease, yet there had been that in his voice which was not like ease. Whether he had more of pain of had been that in his voice, pain or pleasure in seeing her, she could not tell, but he certainly had not seen her with composure. At length, however, the remarks of her companions on her absence of mind roused her, and she felt the necessity of appearing more like herself. They entered the woods, and bidding adieu to the river for a while, ascended some of the higher grounds, whence, in spots where the opening of the trees gave the eye power to wander, there were many charming views of the valley, the opposite hills, and the long range of woods overspreading many and occasionally parted the stream. Mr. Gardner expressed a wish of going round the whole park, but feared it might be beyond a walk. With a triumphant smile, they were told it was 10 miles round. It settled the matter, and they pursued the accustomed circuit, which brought them again, after some time, in descent among hanging woods, in the edge of the water, in one of the narrowest parts. They crossed it by a simple bridge, in character with the general air of the scene. It was a spot less adorned than by any yet visited, and the valley here contracted into a glen, allowed room only for the stream and a narrow walk amidst the rough coppice-wood which bordered it. Elizabeth longed to explore its windings, but when they had crossed the bridge and perceived their distance from the house, Mrs. Gardner, who was not a great walker, could go no further, and thought only of returning to the carriage as quickly as possible. Her niece was, therefore... Oh, we have an ad break coming up. Her niece was therefore obliged to submit, and they took their way toward the house on the opposite side of the river, in the nearest direction. But their progress was slow, for Miss Gardner, though seldom able to indulge the taste, was very fond of fishing, and was so much engaged in watching the occasional appearance of some trout in the water, and talking to the man about them, that he advanced but little. Okay, I am going to let this ad run. So I'm going to put on the pause screen, and I will be back when it's over. I will see you then. Hello. How was your ad break? Was it good? Okay. All right, let's continue. I'm trying to find where I stopped. Um, I'll just start here. Okay. Her niece was therefore obliged to submit, and they took their way towards the house on the opposite side of the river, in the nearest direction, but their progress was slow, for Mr. Gardner, though seldom able to indulge the taste, was very fond of fishing, and was so much engaged in watching the occasional appearance of some trout in the water, and talking to the man about them, that he advanced but little. While wandering on in this slow manner, they were again surprised, and Elizabeth's astonishment was quite equal to what it had been at first, by the sight of Mr. Darcy approaching them, and at no great distance. The walk being here less sheltered than the other side, allowed them to see him before they met. Elizabeth, however astonished, was at least more prepared for an interview than before, and resolved to appear to speak with calmness, if he really had intended to meet them. For a few moments, indeed, she felt that they would probably strike into some other path. This idea lasted while a turning in the walk concealed him for their view, and turning past, he was immediately before them. With a glance, she saw that he had lost none of his recent civility, and, to imitate his politeness, she began, as they met, to admire the beauty of the place, but she had not got beyond the words delightful and charming when some unlucky recollections obtruded, and she fancied that praise of Pemberley from her, which might be mischievously constructed. Her color changed, and she said no more. Mrs. Gardner was standing a little behind, and on her pausing, he asked her if she would do him the honor of introducing him to her friends. This was a stroke of civility to which she was quite unprepared, and she could hardly suppress a smile for his being now seeking the acquaintance of some of those very people against whom his pride had revolted in his offer to herself. What will be his surprise, thought she, when he knows who they are? He takes them now for people of fashion. The introduction, however, was immediately made, and she named the relationship to herself. She stole a sly look at them. And entered into conversation with Mr. Gardner. Elizabeth could not be but pleased, could not but triumph. It was consoling that he should know she had some relations for whom there was no need to blush. She listened most attentively to all that passed between them, and glorified in every expression, every silence of her uncle which marked his intelligence, his taste, or his good manners. The conversation soon turned upon fishing, and she heard Mr. Darcy invite him, with the greatest civility, to fish there as often as he chose, which he continued in the neighborhood, offering at the same time to supply him with a fishing tackle and pointing out the parts of the stream where they usually most sport. Mrs. Gardner, who was walking arm in arm with Elizabeth, gave her a look expressive of her wonder. Elizabeth said nothing, but it gratified her exceedingly. The compliment must be all for herself. Her astonishment, however, was extreme, and cordially she was repeating, "Why is he so altered? From what can it proceed? It cannot be for me. It cannot be for my sake that his manners are thus softened. My reproofs at Hunsford could not work such a change as this. It is impossible that he should still love me." After walking some time in this way, the two ladies in front, the two gentlemen behind, on resuming their places, after descending to the brink of the river for the better inspection of some curious water plant, there chanced to be a little alteration. It originated in Mrs. Gardner, who, fatigued by the exercise of the morning, found Elizabeth's arm inadequate to her support, and consequently preferred her husband's. Mr. Darcy took her place by her niece, and they walked on together. After a short silence, the lady first spoke. She wished him to know that she had been assured of his absence before she came to the place, and accordingly began by observing that his arrival had been very unexpected. "For your housekeeper," she added, "informed us that you would certainly not be there till tomorrow, and indeed, before we left Blackwell, we understood that you were not immediately expected in the country." He acknowledged the truth of it all, and said that business with his steward had occasioned his coming forward a few hours before the rest of the party with whom he had been traveling. "They will join me early tomorrow," he continued, "and among them are some who will claim an acquaintance with you, Mr. Bingley and his sisters." Elizabeth answered only by a slight bow. Her thoughts were instantly driven back to the time when Mr. Bingley's name had been last mentioned between them, and if she might judge from his complexion, his mind was not very differently engaged. "There is also one other person in the party," he continued after a pause, "who more particularly wishes to be known to you. Will you allow me, or do I ask too much, to introduce my sister to your acquaintance during your stay in Lambton? The surprise of such an application was great indeed. It was too great for her to know in what manner she ascended to it. She immediately felt that whatever desire Miss Darcy might have of being acquainted to her must be the work of her brother, and without looking further, it was very satisfactory and gratifying to know that his resentment had not made him think really ill of her. They now walked on in silence, each of them deep in thought. Elizabeth was not comfortable. That was impossible, but she was flattered and pleased. His wish of introducing his sister to her was a compliment of the highest kind. They soon outstripped the others, and when they had reached the carriage, Mr. and Mrs. Gardner were half of a quarter of a mile behind. They had asked her to walk into the house, but she declared herself not tired, and they stood together on the lawn. At such a time, much might have been said, and silence was very awkward. She wanted to talk, but there seemed an embargo on every subject. At last she recollected that she had been traveling, and they talked of Matlock and Dovedale with great perseverance. Yet time of her aunt moved slowly, and her patience and her ideas were nearly worn out before the tete-a-tete was over. On Mr. and Mrs. Gardner's coming up, they were all pressed to go into the house and take some refreshment, but this was declined, and they parted on each side with the utmost politeness. Mr. Darcy handed the ladies into the carriage, and when it drove off, Elizabeth saw him walking slowly toward the house. Elizabeth is down bad, dude. The observations of her uncle and aunt now began, and each of them pronounced him to be indefinitely superior to anything they had expected. He is perfectly well behaved, polite, and unassuming, said her uncle. There is something a little stately in him, to be sure, replied her aunt, but it is most confined to his air, and is not unbecoming. I can now say with the housekeeper that though some people may call him proud, I have seen nothing of it. I was never more surprised by his behavior to us. It was more than civil, it was really attentive, and there was no necessity for such attention. His acquaintance with Elizabeth was very trifling. To be sure, Lizzie, said her aunt, he is not so handsome as Wickham, or rather he has not Wickham's countenance, for his features are perfectly good. But how came you to tell us that he was so disagreeable? Elizabeth excused herself as well as she could, said that she liked him better when they met in Kent than before, and that she had never seen him so pleasant as this morning. But perhaps he may be a little more whimsical in his civilities, replied her uncle. Your great men often are, and therefore I shall not take him at his word about fishing, as he might change his mind another day and warn me off the grounds. Elizabeth felt that they had entirely mistaken his character, but said nothing. For what can we have seen of him? Continued Mrs. Gardner. I really should not have thought that he could have behaved in so cruel a way by anybody, as he has done by poor Wickham. He is not an ill-natured look. On the contrary, there is something pleasing about his mouth when it speaks. What a weird thing to say. And there is something of dignity in his countenance that would not give one an unfavorable idea of his heart. But to be sure, the good lady who showed us the house did give him a most flaming character. I could hardly help laughing aloud sometimes. But he is a liberal master, I suppose, and that, in the eye of a servant, comprehends every virtue. Whimsical in his civilities is a fun line. Agreed. Whimsical in his civilities. But I just don't know why you had to say there is something pleasing about his mouth when he speaks. Like, what? Hi. Rosprey. Thanks for being here. Osprey with an R. Do you like birds? Elizabeth felt herself called on to say something in vindication of his behavior to Wickham, and therefore gave them to understand, in as guarded a manner as she could, that by what she had heard from his relations in Kent, his actions were capable of a very different construction, and that his character was by no means so faulty, nor Wickham's so amiable, as they had been considered in Hertfordshire. In confirmation of this, she related the particulars of all the pecuniary? I'm not quite sure what this says. Okay. Pecuniary transactions in which they had connected, without actually naming her authority, but stating it to be as such as might be relied on. Mrs. Gardiner was surprised and concerned, but as they were now approaching the sense of her former pleasures, every idea gave way to the charm of recollection, and she was too much engaged in pointing out to her husband all the interesting spots of its environs to think of anything else. Fatigued as she had been by the morning walk, they had no sooner dined than she had set off again in quest of her former acquaintance, and the evening was spent in the satisfaction of an intercourse renewed after many years' discontinuance. The occurrences of the days were too full of interest to leave Elizabeth much attention for any of these new friends, and she could do nothing but think, and think with wonder, of Mr. Darcy's civility, and above all, of his wishing her to be acquainted with his sister. Okay, that was chapter 1 of volume 3 of Pride and Prejudice. The most interesting part of that to me was how Elizabeth has just completely, like, all of the sudden, all she can think about is Darcy, even though, like, she rejected him. I feel like she feels so, like, we're just watching her mind go through, like, the mental gymnastics of running into Darcy and, like, how different he's acting than he ever has. So it's interesting to see, like, that shift happening in her. Okay, the next chapter is only 4 pages. How are we all doing out there? Oh, thank you, Rosprey. I appreciate it. I enjoy reading, so I appreciate you saying that. Thank you. Tell me about yourself. Are you a streamer? Are you a writer? Are you a reader? Are you none of the above? Are you all of the above? Tell me. Yes, I enjoy reading aloud. Hold on, I'm just going to reply to this text real quick. Okay. All right. I asked, is your username because you like birds, or I joined Twitch with lofty goals of streaming games or painting minis and the like, but with a newborn, I'm just using it as some evening relaxing time, browsing all the different things people get up to. Ah, very cool. Congratulations on the newborn. That's freaking incredible. I feel like trying to balance I mean, I don't know what it's like because I don't have a child, but trying to balance anything on top of having a newborn is like very, very impressive. So like, yeah, it's okay. Like Twitch will always be here. If you ever have time to stream, you know, obviously people love games, and I'm guessing like by painting miniatures, do you mean like D&D type miniature, like character type things? That's really cool though. That's so sick. Mix of my name and the favorite bird, the osprey. Very surprised not many people get that, so yay. Oh yeah, hell yeah. Two things about ospreys, kind of just one, but my middle school, we were the ospreys, so you know, have that connection. And then the other thing is that my friends and I really love birds. I wouldn't go so far to say that I'm a birder, but I do love bird watching, and I have some binoculars, and I just love birding with my friends who are birders. And it's been fun learning about different birds. So ospreys are sick. Dude, there's been this Cooper's hawk that has been showing up at my work every day. And it's so cool. And then literally yesterday morning, it was a moth. Yesterday morning, there was a Cooper's hawk in my neighbor's front yard. It was so weird. Like, all of a sudden, these Cooper's hawks are like showing up all over, which is a strange thing. But yeah, yeah, birds are sick. Okay, so I am going to read the next chapter after I read your message. That's fun. I find the little moments of escapism, watching little birds go about their lives, or the largest raptors, like, hold on. What's the name on this chat? Okay. Little birds go around their lives with the largest raptors, like red kites or buzzards drifting around helps lift my mood. Not the full camo in a hedge tracking cardinals level birder, but a lover of nature. But anyway, don't want to distract. First of all, love distraction. I'm here for the distraction. I'm here for the chatting. All good. No apologies. That's so cool. Yeah. I guess there are some birders that go that hard, huh? But yeah, no, we're definitely the like pull up to the public park with the binoculars, take a seat and wait for them type of birders. Not insane, but yeah, and you're right. There's just so much joy you can get from just watching them. It also is very satisfying when you start to be able to identify birds, and their nests and their habits and stuff. So that is super cool. I love that for you. I bet there's a lot of bird related Twitch streams as well. Okay. Shall we continue chapter 2 of Pride and Prejudice, of volume 3 of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen? Yes, we shall. Chapter 2. Elizabeth had settled it that Mr. Darcy would bring his sister to visit her, and the very day after her reaching Pemberley, and was consequently resolved not to be out of sight of the inn the whole of that morning. But her conclusion was false, for on the very morning after her own arrival in Lambton, these visitors came. They had been walking around the place with some of their new friends, and were just returned to the inn to dress themselves for dining with the same family, when the voice of a carriage drew them to a window, and they saw a gentleman and lady in a curricle driving up the street. Elizabeth immediately recognized the livery, guessed what it meant, and imparted to a small degree of surprise to her relations by equating them with the honor which she expected. Her uncle and aunt were all amazement, and the embarrassment of her manner as she spoke joined to the circumstance herself, and many of the circumstances of the preceding day opened to them a new idea of business. Nothing had ever suggested it before, but they now felt that there was no other way of accounting for such attentions from such a quarter than by supporting a partiality for their niece. While these newly born notions were passing in their heads, the perturbation of Elizabeth's feelings was every moment increasing. She was quite amazed at her own discomposure, but amongst other causes of disquiet, she dreaded lest the partiality of her brother should have said too much in her favor, and more than commonly anxious to please, she naturally suspected that every power of pleasing would fail her. She retreated from the window, fearful of being seen, and as she now walked up and down the room, endeavoring to compose herself, saw such looks of inquiring surprise in her aunt and uncle as made everything worse. Miss Darcy and her brother appeared, and this formidable introduction took place. With astonishment did Elizabeth see that her new acquaintance was at least as much embarrassed as herself. Since her being at Lambton, she had heard that Miss Darcy was exceedingly proud, but the observation of a very few minutes convinced her that she was only exceedingly shy. She found it difficult to obtain even a word from her beyond a monosyllable. I've never heard that word before, monosyllable. I'm guessing it means like one syllable. But yeah. Miss Darcy was tall, and on a larger scale than Elizabeth, and though little more than 16, her figure was formed, and her appearance womanly and graceful. She was less handsome than her brother, but there was sense and good humor in her face, and her manners were perfectly unassuming and gentle. Elizabeth, who had expected to find in her as acute and unembarrassed an observer as ever Mr. Darcy had been, was much relieved by discerning such different feelings. They had not been long together before Darcy told her that Bingley was also coming to wait on her, and she had barely time to express her satisfaction and prepare for such a visitor, when Bingley's quick step was heard on the stairs, and in a moment had entered the room. All Elizabeth's anger against him had long done away, but had she still felt any, it could hardly have stood its ground against the unaffected cordiality by which he expressed himself on seeing her again. He inquired in a friendly, though general way, after her family, and looked and spoke with the same good-humored ease that he had ever done. To Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner he was scarcely a less interesting personage than to herself. They had long wished to see him. The whole party before them, indeed, excited a lively attention. The suspicions which had just arisen of Mr. Darcy and their niece, directed their observations toward each with an earnest, though guarded enquiry, and they soon drew from those enquiries a full conviction that one of them at least knew what it was to love. On the lady's sensations they remained a little in doubt, and that the gentleman was overflowing with adoration was evident enough. Elizabeth, on her side, had much to do. She wanted to ascertain the feelings of each of her visitors, and wanted to compose her own and to make herself agreeable to all. And in the latter object, which she feared most to fail, she was most sure of success, for those to whom she endeavored to give pleasure were possessed in her favor. Bingley was ready, Georgiana was eager, and Darcy determined to be pleased. And seeing Bingley, her thoughts naturally flew to her sister, and oh, how ardently she longed to know whether any of his were directed in a like manner. Sometimes she would fancy that he talked less than on former occasions, and once or twice pleased herself with the notion that as he looked at her, he was trying to trace a resemblance. But, though this might be imaginary, she could not be deceived as to his behavior to Miss Darcy, who had been set up as a rival of Jane. No look appeared on either side that spoke particular regard. Nothing occurred between them that could justify the hopes of his sister. On this point she was soon satisfied, and 2 or 3 little circumstances occurred ere they parted, which, in her anxious interpretation, denoted a recollection of Jane, not untinctured by tenderness, and a wish of saying more that might lead to a mention of her, had he dared. He observed to her at a moment when the others were talking together, and in a tone which had something of real target, that it was a very long time since he had the pleasure of seeing her, and before she could reply had added, "It is above 8 months. We had not met since the 26th of November, when we were all dancing together at Netherfield." Elizabeth was pleased to find his memory so exact, and he afterwards took occasion to ask her, when unattended to by any of the rest, whether all her sisters were at Longbourn. There was not much in the question, nor in the preceding remark, but there was a look and a manner which gave them meaning. It was not often that she could turn her eyes on Mr. Darcy himself, but whenever she did catch a glimpse, she saw an expression of general complacence, and in all that he said, she heard an accent so far removed from hauteur or disdain of his companions, as so convinced her that the improvement of manners which she had yesterday witnessed, however temporary in its existence might prove, had at least outlived one day. Another animal-inspired name, I see. Yes. Manitoba. Oh wait, this is you from earlier, Ivan. Yes, hi. Monito Ivan. I'm like, hi, and you're like, I've been here. Sorry, I didn't recognize your username at first. Hi, Ivan, how are you? Monito Ivan. Ivan, ¿de dónde eres? ¿De dónde eres, Ivan? Yo tengo un prima, se llama Ivana. De Ecuador. Cool. I love that. Very, very cool. That's awesome. My dad is from Spain. So, yeah, I'm Spanish, but not Latinx at all. And people always look at me and they're like, Juana, like, you don't look Spanish. And I'm like, I actually look very Spain Spanish. I just don't look like what you think Spanish looks like. It's kind of interesting. I like that you pronounce my name in the Hispanic way. Many English speakers say Ivan. Yeah. Yup. Yeah, I know it's Ivan. I was just saying I have a cousin named Ivana, so I get it. Yeah. Well, people see my name on paper and they think it's Juana or something like that. I'm like, have you ever heard the name Juan? It's just that with an A at the end. Anyway. It was not often that she could turn her eyes on Mr. Darcy himself, but whenever she did catch a glimpse, she saw an expression of general complacence. I think I read this yesterday. Yesterday, a minute ago, but I'm gonna keep reading. And in all that he said, she heard an accent so far removed from hauteur or disdain of his companions as convinced her that the improvement of manners which she had yesterday witnessed, however temporary its existence might prove, had at least outlived one day. When she saw him thus seeking the acquaintance and contouring the good opinion of people with whom any intercourse of a few months ago would have been a disgrace, when she saw him thus civil, not only to herself, but to the very relations whom he had openly disdained, and recollected their last lively scene on Hunsford Parsonage, the change was so great, and struck so forcibly on her mind, that she could hardly retain her astonishment from being visible. Never, even in the company of his dear friends in Netherfield, or had his dignified relations at Rosings, had he seen him so desirous to please, so free from self-consequence, or unbending reserve as now, when no importance could result from the success of his endeavours, and when even the acquaintance of those to whom his attentions were addressed would draw down the ridicule and censure of the ladies both of Netherfield and Rosings. The one and only way to say it. Yes, it is the one and only way to say it. I don't mind being called Ivan. Yeah, no, totally. I totally get that. I mean, here's the thing with my name. I know that it's pronounced Juana, right? But most people say Juana. Like, most people turn it into a W sound, like this Americanized Juana type of thing, which I don't care. Like, I think that's totally fine. I've been called Juana my whole life. I say it sometimes. Like, I'm totally chill with Juana. But when people do say Juana, I definitely take note of it. And I'm like, that's cool. So, yeah, I don't care. I love when people say the one and only. One time this dude came up to me and he was like, hey, just in case you ever forget, you're one in a million. And I was like, thanks, man. I appreciate it. I'll never forget it. Okay. All right. Hell yeah. All right. We're almost done this chapter. Not really. We have a page and a half to go. And these pages are long as hell. Okay. Their visitor stayed with them above half an hour, and when they arose to depart, Mr. Darcy called on his sister to join him in expressing their wish of seeing Mr. and Mrs. Gardner, though with a difference which marked her little in the habit of giving invitations, readily obeyed. Mrs. Gardner looked at her niece, desirous of knowing who she, whom the invitation most concurred, felt disposed as to its acceptance, but Elizabeth had turned away her head. Presuming, however, that this studied avoidance spoke rather a momentary embarrassment than any dislike of the proposal, and seeing in her husband, who was fond of society, a perfect willingness to accept it, she ventured to engage for her attendance, and the day after the next was fixed on. Ooh, interesting. Monito means little monkey. I did not know that. Thank you for educating me. I appreciate that. And you like spelling it with the double I. Hell yeah, I love that. Monito Ivan. Okay. Bingley expressed great pleasure in the certainty of seeing Elizabeth again, having still a great deal to say to her, and many enquiries to make after all their Hertfordshire friends. Elizabeth, construing all this into a wish of hearing her speak of her sister, was pleased, and on this account, as well as some others, found herself, when the visitors left them, capable of considering the last half hour with some satisfaction, though while it was passing, the enjoyment of it had been little. Eager to be alone and fearful of enquiries or hints from her uncle and aunt, she stayed with them only long enough to hear their favorable opinion of Bingley, and then hurried away to dress. This is the zoo reading channel. Literally, we've got iguanas, we've got monkeys, we've got ospreys, we've got it all. Life is a zoo, but we are exhibited or the keepers. Ooh, we the exhibited or the keepers. Love this twist on the classic Shakespearean quote. Hell yeah. But she had no reason to fear Mr. and Mrs. Gardner's curiosity. It was not to their wish to force her communication. It was evident that she was much better acquainted with Mr. Darcy than they had before any idea of. It was evident that he was very much in love with her. They saw much to interest, but nothing to justify enquiry. Of Mr. Darcy, it was now a matter of anxiety to think well, and, as far as their acquaintance reached, there was no fault to find. They could not be untouched by this politeness, and they had drawn his character from their own feelings of his servant's report without any reference to any other account. The circle in Hertfordshire to which he was known would not have recognized it from Mr. Darcy. There was now an interest, however, in believing the housekeeper, and as soon as they became sensible the authority of a servant who had known him since he was 4 years old, of whose own manner indicated respectability, was not as to be hastily rejected. Neither had anything occurred in the intelligence of their Lambton friends that could materially lessen its weight. They had nothing to accuse him of but pride. Pride he probably had, and if not, it would certainly be imputed by the inhabitants of a small market town where the family did not visit. It was acknowledged, however, that he was a liberal man and did much good among the poor. With respect to Wickham, the travelers, I see that we're about to have an ad break. I am going to continue reading, though, and yeah, I'm going to continue reading, but I will make sure to say goodbye after the ad break if this chapter is done by the time before the ad ends, if that makes sense. Okay. Anyway, because I think I'm going to end the stream when I'm done this chapter, because that took longer than I thought, which is good. Oh, no, I have to finish. Maybe not. I don't know. I'll think about it. Okay. With respect to Wickham, the travelers soon found that he had not held there in much estimation, for though the chief of his concerns with the son of his patron was imperfectly understood, it was yet a well-known fact that, on his quitting Derbyshire, he had left many debts behind him, which Mr. Darcy afterwards discharged. As for Elizabeth, her thoughts were at Pemberley this evening more than the last, and the evening, though it had passed, it seemed long, was not long enough to determine her feelings toward one in the mansion, that she lay awake 2 whole hours, endeavoring to make them out. She certainly did not hate them. No, hatred had vanished long ago, and she had almost as long enough ashamed of ever feeling a dislike against him that could be so called. The respect created by the conviction of his valuable qualities, though at first unwillingly admitted, had for some time ceased to be repugnant in her feelings, and it was now heightened into somewhat of a friendlier nature by the testimonies so highly in his favor, and bringing forward his disposition in so amiable a light, which yesterday had produced. But above all, above respect and esteem, there was a motive within her of goodwill which could not be overlooked. It was gratitude. Gratitude not merely for having once loved her, but for loving her still well enough to forgive all the petulance and acrimony of her manner in rejecting him, and all the unjust accusations accompanying her rejection. He who, she had not been persuaded, would avoid her as her greatest enemy, seemed on the accidental meeting most eager to preserve the acquaintance, and without any indicate display of regard or any peculiarity of manner, where their 2 selves only were concerned, was soliciting the good opinion of her friends, and bent on making her own to his sister. Such a change in a man of so much pride excited not only astonishment but gratitude, for to love, ardent love, it must be attributed, and as such its impression on her was of a sort to be encouraged, as by no means unpleasing, though it could not exactly be exactly defined. She respected, she esteemed, she was grateful to him, and she felt a real interest in his welfare, and she only wanted to know how far she wished that welfare to depend upon herself, and how far it would be for the happiness of both that she would employ the power which her fancy told her she still possessed of bringing on the renewal of his addresses. It had been settled that evening, between the aunt and the niece, that such a striking civility as Miss Darcy's, in coming to them on the very day of her arrival in Pemberley, for she had reached it only to a late breakfast, ought to be intimidated, though it could not be inqualled, by some exhortation of politeness on their side, and consequently that they would be highly expedient to wait on her at Pemberley the following morning. They were, therefore, to go. Elizabeth was pleased, though, when she asked herself the reason. She had very little to say in reply. Mr. Gardiner left them soon after breakfast. The fishing scheme had been renewed the day before, and a positive engagement made of his meeting some of the gentlemen at Pemberley by noon. Wow. Okay, that was the end of that chapter. So many feelings expressed in that chapter, and I'm so glad that I got to hear them all. You know, this book has gotten better. I wasn't loving it at first, but it's growing on me a bit. Just this, like, how there's a strong character arc. Okay, I'm heading to sleep now, but I want to say thank you for a period of calm, sorely needed today. Quite coincidental as well. I tuned into a section of a chapter with references Hertfordshire, where I grew up. No way! I wish you all the well. How fun that we can all be listening to a reading from all over the world. Osprey, that makes me so happy. Thank you for being here, and like, thank you for saying that, because it feels good, because like, that's exactly what I want from this channel, right? So yeah, thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate it. Okay, well, this is perfect timing because I'm wrapping up the stream right now anyway. So I will be back a week from today to continue, or I guess not even. I don't know when I'm going to be back because next week I'm busy, but I will be back to continue reading this book. And yeah, thank you for being here, and I hope you sleep well, and thank you to everyone that tuned in today. And yeah, okay, good night and goodbye. Thank you for the follow, Rosspray. I appreciate it. Stick around, say hey, and tell the baby that they are adorable for me. Okay, good night.